Welcome back to another segment in our series called Divorce Deconstructed, where I deconstruct and break down the different parts of a divorce. Let's remove the mystery from a divorce case because it's not that complex. And I want you, prospective client, you, any person interested in family law, to really understand the six, seven, eight big parts of a prospective divorce. Today, I'm going to talk about property division. And I would say most people probably just generically would understand that part of a divorce is dividing financial assets, real estate, and also debts. It's a big financial issue. It might in fact have kind of the most value, the biggest kind of thing in play during your case. Obviously, things like child support and maintenance and attorney's fees are also big financial issues as well. But today I'm going to talk sort of three big general points on property division, just so you have a good sort of working understanding of property division when it comes to your divorce case. So first of all, first big point to make and define is answering this question. What property are we talking about? Because it's not as obvious as you think. I'm going to share the screen here for a second to actually break this down a little bit clearer for everybody. The property that we are talking about that is subject to division, this is the Illinois law that governs property division. And you see this word in quotes here, marital property. Marital property is what's subject to division by a court, by a judge in a divorce case. And generally speaking, here's the definition of marital property. All property you or your spouse acquire either individually or jointly from the date of marriage forward through date of divorce. Whatever in that circle is marital property subject to being divided. Now, this part of the law, though, also talks about this phrase here, right? Non-marital property. Non-marital property are some exceptions that, although it might be property acquired during the marriage, or it might seem like it should be subject to division, aren't. Let me just highlight a few of the big ones, because I don't want to take too long on this sort of overview video. But what are some of the big ones? One, in inheritance, right? This is legal verbiage that basically means, right, if I inherit some money right now while I'm married, from, my mom dies or something, and I get $1 million, so long as I kind of keep that separate, that's not subject to being divided. That's non marital property. I mean, another big one is property acquired before the marriage, so long as I keep that property separate and I don't kind of jointly hold it. Property acquired after a judgment of legal separation, that's a thing. It's actually one of the few good reasons, in my opinion, to get a legal separation is it creates a point after which anything that's acquired, your spouse is not entitled to any of it. It's non-marital property. Number 4 here, right, is a prenup, premarital agreement. Right, that's a thing. Enter into a prenup before you get married, or a postnuptial agreement after you get married, where you're basically setting forth in a contract sort of like what property goes to which spouse. It's kind of like it's basically contracting what happens in a divorce, and sort of, instead of sort of letting a court decide it. So I'm going to highlight those 3 or 4 biggies as the ones you run into quite a lot and this one, maybe even here being the biggest, property acquired before the marriage, right? If you get married later in life, 40, 50 years old, it's probably likely you're bringing some stuff into the marriage. That's a lot different than getting married at 22, right? You probably have maybe a home, maybe a 401k plan, et cetera. And so long as you're kind of keeping that asset separate and not kind of putting in both names with your spouse, it's going to be non-marital property, not subject to being divided. So that's my attempt to answer that first question. What property are we actually talking about when we're talking about property division related to your divorce? Now, let's go further down this law a little bit and talk about how property does get divided. And I need to keep this short because, how it gets divided is kind of a deep dive. And I think point number one would be in Illinois. Illinois is what we call an equitable division state and not an equal division property state. There are many states that I don't know my law in a lot of other states, but we call some states, not Illinois, community property states, which means kind of like stuff you acquire, marital property is an automatic 50-50 division. Illinois is not that. Illinois uses a series of factors in deciding how property is divided. And this basically is a list of all these factors. Now, let me highlight a few because even though there are 12 numbered factors here, I find that, what do I have written down here? 3 of these are really the biggies. Okay. Let's see. The duration of the marriage, I think, matters. The relevant economic circumstances of the parties, the age, health, station, occupation. I find that those couple there basically sort of what's the sort of the earning potential of each spouse, right? And sort of the age of each spouse. If a court's sort of looking towards the future, meaning we're getting divorced and, I don't know what, I'm a investment banker earning $2 million a year. And, my wife is a high school graduate whose only jobs have been waitressing, right? That's going to weigh into sort of like, probably my wife getting a much larger percentage of the marital property because of those relevant economic circumstances, whereas I probably can really earn a lot more after we're divorced. She likely can't, and therefore she should really get more of the marital property. So that would just be a really simple example. I would also point out here, it talks about whether the apportionment of property is in lieu or in addition to maintenance. That's a big point. And here's what I see happen in a lot of cases is this. If somebody's getting a lot of spousal support, right? Spousal support and maintenance is the idea that you're getting paid every month from your, let's just say your ex-husband. And, that's a big stream of income in a lot of cases, and it might last for a long time. Sometimes that's a permanent income stream. So if you're getting a significant amount of maintenance, what I tend to see is then what will frequently happen is that the property division will get to be fairly equal because the one spouse is getting this other significant income stream. However, and like the language in the law here says, if we're not giving maintenance and really the property division is going to be sort of the entire financial picture, that's when you'll see the more imbalanced divisions of property, because, right, it's in lieu, right? You're not getting this other stream of income, but because you're not getting that stream of income, maybe the division of property is going to be much more of a 75-25 or something because of that fact, that there's no maintenance happening. So I think that's the driver when you really look at these factors. It's what are really the economic kind of positions of the parties as we're looking at them right now going through a divorce, and like what is their potential as you look to the future. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share and just finish with this big point, and that is just, I call it tricky issues to consider when you're talking about property division. Valuing assets, that's a big issue, right? It kind of goes back to that first point where I was talking about what property are we really talking about? And here I'm talking about, what's the value of that property? And right, some things are obvious, right? I'm looking at an IRA or a 401k plan or a bank account, right? There's a value on that account. But real estate, even though everybody, can just kind of jump on Zillow or realtor.com or something and throw around real estate values, right? You need to get that property appraised. You need to get that property appraised. Other things that are critical: pensions, municipal pensions, what we would call a defined a benefit pension, that it's not a set dollar amount like a 401k plan, but it's more based on like years of service and that sort of thing. That's a big asset. You got to know what that thing's worth. And then another tricky one is a business, a small business. What is this law firm, medical practice, excuse me, restaurant worth? Because it has value. Right? If somebody's had a business going for a number of years and it's really yielding consistent income, that has value. That's a tricky issue, valuing assets. Are there items that have been sort of mushed together, or the legal word for it is commingled? Maybe I bought a home before I got married, but now I'm using my income while I'm married to, put on the new bathroom and doing significant upgrades. Now, kind of like, is that non-marital property becoming marital? That's a really, really tricky issue. It's kind of that co-mingled type of an issue, an asset that was not marital property, potentially becoming marital property. Third, debt. That's a big issue, and how to do it is really, really important because, right, frequently you're talking about, let's just say, a credit card that's sitting out here with, I don't know, $50,000 in credit card debt. Yeah, you can divide it between the spouses, but if that's only in my name, and now my wife, even though the divorce says she's entitled or has to pay half of it, Capital One doesn't really care what my divorce says. So it's really important to handle that right. And usually the better way to handle it is either one, if absolutely necessary, think about a bankruptcy situation, but two is pay it off with some asset and just get rid of it in the divorce judgment. So you're not running into that situation where, even though it's divided in the divorce, it's going to come back to bite one of those parties going forward. And then the last thing I just have is this idea of dissipation. Dissipation is a synonym. Well, it's the legal word that sort of means a waste. And it's the idea of somebody's like blowing money while your case is going down on, and while your marriage has sort of been on the outs, let's say. And, right, an average divorce, I think, nationally takes something like 11 to 14 months. And, you need to live during that time, right? I mean, you need to buy groceries and gas and heck, go to the movies and go to restaurants, right? Just normal average day-to-day living expenses. But this idea of dissipation and waste is when one of the spouses going through a divorce is just blowing money in something that's totally inappropriate. The ones I see a lot of are gambling type debts, and then maybe somebody has their side lady, right? Now you're doing expensive outings and travel with that person. And that sort of waste is something that's very relevant in the property division part of a divorce. So just to highlight once again, what property are we talking about when we're talking about property division, that difference between marital and non-marital property? How is property divided, right? Economic circumstances is a big factor. And then just some of those tricky issues, valuing assets, how to handle debt, how to handle dissipation or waste of assets. That's my summary of property division related to divorce in Illinois. And let me just close with this. The best way to really help yourself going into a case and to help your lawyer going into a case is really to find and know what your property is. What is your spouse's, your joint marital property going into a case? That really helps me as your lawyer. It eases the burden and it eliminates a lot of wasteful court and legal stuff of really kind of trying to find that needle in the haystack. That's my statement to you. If you're considering divorce, really know where your accounts are and your assets are to help get this property division stuff going and handled properly.